Welcome to episode 46 of 100 Years of Marine Corps Tankers, a channel that was created as a way to honor the lineage and history of the United States Marine Armored Community. Through these interviews, the stories of Marine tankers remain the test of time and will not be forgotten. This week, the channel is proud to host the Inspector Instructor for 4th Tank Battalion. LtCol Joseph Buffamante has risen through the ranks and served his entire career in the armored community, having seen some intense fighting and earning a Purple Heart for a great nation. Welcome to the channel, sir.
Thanks, JR. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for making the time to come on here today. So, sir,
yeah, no problem.
Coming from New York, graduate of Miami, Ohio, and receiving your commission in 2003. Did you know early on that you wanted to become a Marine Corps officer?
No, not really. So there's no one in my immediate family that was ever in the military, specifically the Marine Corps. And really, it wasn't until I was really starting to look at the service as opportunities that I figured out that my grandparents were in the military. One grandpa in the Army, one grandpa in the Navy back in World War II. But I really didn't grow up in a military background. It was my junior year in high school in New York that they sent me to some program called Boys State. I had no idea what this was. My parents were like, I get you out of the house for 2 weeks in the summer, so you're going. And half the program was teaching juniors in high school about the Constitution, the flag, and basic civics government type structure. The other half of the program was actually ran by Marines. I don't know where they got them now that I know how the Marine Corps works. I don't know how they conjured up drill instructors, but they had drill instructors there. So they kind of taught the discipline side of the house and put a little bit of structure into juniors in high schools. And I liked it. And I was like, yeah, this is something that I could consider doing. So I called up the recruiter came out to the house. I was ready to sign on the dotted line, stand on the yellow footprints. And then I had a friend in the Naval Academy was like, hey, you should look at an officer program, try to get college out of the way. So I did a little research there, ended up going on an ROTC scholarship to Miami, Ohio. And that's kind of how my journey began.
And the journey continued and all the way through TBS. And then you graduated the Marine Armor Basic Officer course in May of 2004. Did you know at TBS that you wanted to become a tanker, sir?
It was high on my list initially. Like everybody wants to be an infantry officer at TBS. And then you do the first couple field exercises. So I quickly changed my mind and was like, this walking and carrying stuff is not for me. And then tanks, I think tanks was always, 1 or 2 on the list. But from that day on, it was always number 1 on the list. And I was lucky enough to get it. And then here we are today.
Yes, sir. And your first assignment being 2nd Tank Battalion, where you served as a platoon commander from 2004 to 2007. This was a pretty interesting period of time to come into 2nd Tanks. By that point, obviously, post Desert Gulf, obviously post 9/11 as well. You knew you were deploying, and in fact, you did with Company C to Fallujah, and participated in Operation Al Fajr. And we've already talked to some folks from Company C, but as the platoon commander, kind of fresh out the gate, you're going to combat. How did you personally prepare, for this operation?
Yeah, this was probably one of the luckiest times I had in my career. The stars aligned. I knew coming out of Knox that I was going to Charlie Company. I knew Charlie Company was deploying. And I just got really super lucky. So I check into 2nd Tanks. Colonel Ronstor, then Captain Ronstor, was my first company commander. Major Aaron Smithley was the XO at the time. And they just kind of took me under their wings. We had a great group of lieutenants: Jeff Lee, Dave Klingensmith, who I think you had on one of these episodes.
Yes, sir.
Mike O'Quinn, who's now my counterpart on the SMCR side. And the list goes on and on. Joe Cash, Omar Adami were the other lieutenants in the platoon. So I checked in I want to say late June. And we were going to gunnery in July, block leave end of August, and we were deploying end of August, early September, if my timeline serves me correctly. And like I just said, I have 6 months experience at this point in the Marine Corps, TBS, and maybe 8 months of experience when you factor in tank school and all that other stuff, but zero experience. So it was certainly overwhelming to kind of know, hey, I'm getting thrust right into this. But I'll say this, the Marine Corps does a good job of preparing the lieutenants. Armor Officer Basic School set me up for success. Staff Sergeant Peeler at the time, I'm not sure what he got out as. He was my instructor at AOBC. And then the two people that probably helped me the most, well, I'll say 3 people. Aaron Smithley, just sharing his experiences as a lieutenant on the march up. Staff Sergeant Hines was my 2 tank, who really took me under his wing. He was kind of my first platoon sergeant as well. And then Gunny Jules was my platoon sergeant. And between those 3 people, they really helped mold me to figure out what the heck was going on. So I think you had Colonel Bodish on not too long ago.
Sure.
And he talked about kind of our workups. Those also helped. I think within 2 weeks of checking in, we were in the field. And he talked about it in his interview. But we really didn't know if we were going to be on tanks or if we were going to be on trucks. Mm-hmm. So the whole workup period was kind of dual purpose. We were doing truck stuff, dismounted stuff half the time, and we were doing tank stuff the other half of the time. So first field exercise, we're out in Mountain Town in Camp Lejeune, and it's all dismounted operations. I think we maybe had 4 or 5 tanks out there to do some tank infantry integration type things. But we were doing patrolling, basic land nav, basic room clearing, and then some convoy ops type stuff on trucks. And then we went to gunnery. So we qualified on the tanks like during the day, during the night. And then at the end of the night, we would get into Humvees and we would do night patrolling in Humvees. And the lieutenants would rotate through the tower as kind of being in the COC. So you kind of were COC tracking, or you were doing a patrol, or you were getting whatever sleep you could to get prepared for gunnery the next day. So we worked all the way up through crew section and platoon level gunnery. Once we were done with platoon level gunnery, then we did a platoon dismounted assault on SR-10 to make sure we were prepared for that. So we got in the gun trucks, we patrolled up, we made contact, then we had to dismount and clear the objective. And I just remember standing in like knee deep water in the middle of SR-10. And it was like, I thought it was pretty cool. I didn't know any better. It was great training to get us prepared on the short time that we had to get prepared. So that's less than 2 months that we had to work up, get the platoon. I think we got a bunch of new Marines dumped to us just before those first field exercises. So we had about half the platoon and probably a little under half the company were all new tankers straight out of Fort Knox, who ended up just getting thrust into it with everybody else. So I think there was a little bit of element that, while we had the senior staff NCOs and a couple officers who had been around the block before, most of us were going into this for our first time together. And I think that really helped the camaraderie out. At one point, First Sergeant Buck, who was our company first sergeant, he grew up an infantry guy. So he was out on the range teaching people how to BZO, night sights, and all sorts of stuff for dismounted operations. There was just a lot of unknowns going into the deployment. And I think we found out just before we left that we would probably be on tanks the entire time. We certainly did not have any idea that Al-Fajr was in our future.
So just to circle back, sir, I mean, you named the names you named, if you were to build a Topps baseball card list of all-stars, I mean, that company C was so deep with all-stars. But then you brought out a very interesting point about the new guys as well, you being one of them. So that was a very good blend. And I think that's probably ultimately what ended up being successful for company C. And how fast was it when you guys were in country, sir, before you actually saw your first kinetic event?
let's see, the first, I would say, month and a half while we're in country, we were kind of on a 3 platoon rotation. You had one platoon that was on TCP1 or Traffic Control Point 1 duty, AKA the Cloverleaf in Fallujah.
Mm-hmm.
And that duty essentially consisted of 12 hours sitting out in front of, I forget which company, but it was 3-5. Captain Chontosh was the company commander. You sat out in front of their HESCO barrier patrol base, and you really just waited to have a mortar round or a burst of machine gun fire shot at you. And the approval to shoot back at that point in time was extremely challenging. It had to go all the way up to the MEF for approval. You had to maintain positive identification, which you couldn't do because you couldn't see through the buildings, especially by the time you got the approval process. So there was a lot of angst and frustration as part of that duty. It was literally 12 hours. You would sit there, you'd either be on the day shift or the night shift. And that's essentially what happened. It was more of a deterrent for people to come out of the city over towards Camp Fallujah and Camp Bahariya, where the coalition forces were staged. And we were right on the heels of Fallujah 1. So there was sensitivities involved with, who can go in the city, who can't go in the city. How are we going to clean up of what was left of the April decisions and things like that. So there was just a lot of uncertainty on that duty. For the other 12 hours, you're at Camp Bahariya as a section on QRF. So if something did happen out there at Traffic Control Point 1, that section was first on out of the chute to come reinforce the position. And then there was a platoon at Camp Fallujah that was also on QRF. They were more kind of a centralized QRF. So Camp Bahariya was more of a QRF to Traffic Control Point 1, whereas the platoon at Camp Fallujah was kind of region-wide QRF. And then you had a platoon that was kind of in a maintenance cycle. And those rotations were about 3 to 5 days, depending on what else was going on in the operations. But that was kind of the first month and a half of just kind of rotating through. We did a lot of tank infantry integration towards the backside of that, over with 3-5 and 3-1 at their respective camps. That was really more towards when we started to get indications and warnings that we were going back into the city.
And then when you did, was that the onset of Al-Fajr, or did that come later, sir?
No, that was the onset of Al-Fajr. So that TCP-1 duty lasted through about the end of October. And then we really started to ramp up for Al-Fajr mid-October and end of October. We knew we were going in. We just never really knew the exact date, And I don't even know if we really knew the exact date until about 72 hours out. My tank got hit with a mortar round on October 17th. So I was out of commission for about a week and a half. And I know that during that time frame, they started to do the initial leaders recon of where we were going to go into the city, because Gunny Jules got to take the platoon out, and that they actually got to shoot back when they were out there that time. So that was kind of the first time we really started to get kinetic. We had shot small arms and a couple main gun rounds from Traffic Control Point 1, but it was nothing like we were getting ready to do for Al-Fajr.
Gunny Jules is taking out the platoon. You snap in. What was the mission set, or what was the desired end state for the operation?
The desired end state was really just to clear the city of all enemy combatants or foreign combatants, as we learned later on that there was a lot of foreign fighters in there as well. And really, provide a security situation that was feasible to turn back over to the Iraqi government, back over to the Fallujah people, to get that city back on the right track. And when we went into the city was essentially declared hostile. Everything in the city was essentially declared hostile. There was announcements leading up to the invasion that we were coming in. that if you didn't want to be a part of it, then you needed to leave now. And for the most part, I think the true law-abiding citizens did adhere to that. And I don't think there was many good people left in that city when we actually decided to go in.
In the last interview, we learned that Colonel Bodish was actually cross-trained as an as an intelligence officer. And I'm sure that he made sure that his company was set up properly with the proper intel packets. So 72 hours out, did you all have the proper intel packets and you had the buildings identified and you knew pretty generally, or even more specifically, how you were going to conduct that operation?
Yeah, so we knew we were going north to south. We actually thought the city was more fortified than it ended up turning out to be. And I think that's really a testament to, once we kind of lost our foothold in April when we were ordered out, we kind of lost a little bit of intelligence as far as which buildings were which, where the fortifications were, how many IEDs were in there, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we were well prepared as far as which streets we were going down. The maps were pretty clear on that. It was relatively easy to navigate once you kind of got into the city and you were rolling around for a couple of days. It became, I shouldn't say easy. It became somewhat of the norm of how you could navigate in there. I would say one thing that I personally wasn't expecting was the amount of cables and wires in the city. So, never been to Iraq in my life, obviously, up until this point. And I'm coming from a setting in the United States where the telephone poles and the wires and everything are up above street level. You don't have to worry about running your pickup truck into that or anything like that. And then you get into the city of Fallujah, and there's just wires everywhere. People are running whatever they can into the power source, because at this point, power was at a premium. I think the city had surges all the time. By the time we were in there, the power was obviously cut. But I just remember the first street we went down, I looked at my loader, Chase Good, and was like, I don't even know if we can get through there. It was just a rat's nest of wires everywhere. But 70 tons of steel took care of some wires pretty easily after that.
Yes, sir. And how long was the operation?
So the initial push, I want to say, lasted about 2 weeks. So I think we went in on 7 November, and then we kind of stayed the night in the city, went firm at night. Wherever the grunts were going firm. We went firm in the intersections there. And I want to say that lasted probably the first 5 or 6 days, where the only time we were leaving the city was to go get fuel, ammo, and a little bit of extra chow, and then we were going right back in, and it was a section rotation on the way out, so the tanks were always there. So I would say about 2 weeks for that initial push, and then that got us all the way to the south side of the city, and then became all the back clearing, where literally we went street by street, house by house, all the way back through the city to make sure that all enemy fighters were indeed cleared out of there. And that lasted through the end of December, I would say. And then we started to do some more rotations out to the Karma area. But we were in that city from November through the time we left, which was, I want to say, April timeframe. And then, we can talk about the rotation of kind of what you did after that.
Yes, sir. Before we do that, this was still early on with what came to be kind of the doctrinal development of tank infantry integration. And I know that you were, there's a couple operations, obviously, after the initial push, where that was really kind of gelled. At this point, it's still kind of new, but their tactics and TTPs are kind of tactics training, tactics, techniques, and procedures are kind of solidified. How did you fall into that, and what were things that you were using within your platoon to kind of control, rate of movement, direction of fire, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll back up to before we went into the city. We spent a considerable amount of time with 3-5 and 3-1. That's who Charlie Company was attached to for the initial push. Just working through basic tank infantry integration, and it would be squads at a time. Would come around, as we were doing the traffic control point 1 duties, the section that was back at Camp Bahia was doing tank infantry integration with the squads back there as we prepared. And it was everything from, this is where you stand, this is where we can put you if you have to get on the turret, as far as moving infantry around. And that paid off later when we started to do all the back clearing. It was, this is what the tank sounds like when it's going from park to drive. This is what it sounds like when it's going from drive to reverse. Mm-hmm. If you hear these sounds, get out of the way. This is what we can carry for you. This is what we can't carry for you. This is how the tank infantry phone works. Although they seem to always screw that up, but it was fine. They had a lot more pressing matters than to figure out which button to push on the tank infantry phone. This is the capabilities of our radio systems in the tanks, which we leverage quite a bit as far as them or us relaying messages, to and from different positions, because they only had certain radios that could barely reach around the corner, where we had the amplified radios that could reach all the way back to Camp Fallujah. So we just worked it all out prior to as best we could. And you, as well as I know, no plan survives first contact.
Sure.
So we had always advocated that don't let the infantrymen lead the tanks, because you cut off all of our weapon systems. So we were pretty good on as far as the tanks were leading, and it was usually 2 tanks out in front. So 1 tank totally out in front, with the second tank kind of right behind that tank, covering the front tanks, left and right lateral limits and vertical above the tank. And then you had the tank, the infantrymen behind that second tank, really covering the sides and the top of that second tank. And that's essentially how it went day on for literally months, until it kind of got a little bit more calm in the city. And then we eventually, on some of those final patrols, the infantry were kind of in the lead, or we would do some satellite patrolling where we would go down a separate street. They would go down another street, and then we would try to, catch the enemy off guard, per se, if they didn't think that we were with them that day. Mm-hmm. But we did all sorts of training up front. We were essentially, as a section of tanks, working for squad leaders for this entire push. Yes, the company commanders and the platoon commanders for the infantry units, they gave us left and right lateral limits, but by the time you get everybody spread out, those guys are only one person, so they're not on every street that you're on. So you're working for a fire team leader or squad leader that got assigned the same street that you were on. And I thought the tank infantry integration worked about as good as it possibly could have during that entire fight.
Yes, sir. And I think that's kind of the beginning of what later became the concept of the strategic corporal. I think that was probably the infancy of that. And we talked about tank infantry integration, but what about combined arms?
So we had artillery that was based out of Camp Fallujah, and then you had just about any and all air support that you could possibly wish for. And just going back to some of the tank infantry integration, we at times had grunts on top of turrets with AT4s or SMAWs because we couldn't get the right angle inside of a wall of a building to make a breach or engage a particular enemy. We were just as creative as we possibly could be with tank infantry integration stuff. There is no worse sound on the battlefield than artillery coming in danger close. And when I say danger close, we were 50 to 100 feet next to artillery, friendly artillery impacting buildings near us. And it just it's a loud, whistling, freight train-like sound that you'll never forget in your life. My favorite combined arms asset was a KC-130 that flew overhead every night, call sign Basher. And there was just an eerie calm that came each night. We went firm. The enemy seemed to go firm. There really wasn't a whole lot of night fighting. My guess is the enemy didn't really have the capability to do it at night, which I think was fine with the coalition forces, because that was our opportunity to kind of get some semblance of rest, however long it was, 2, 3, 1 hour, 30 minutes, whatever it was for that night. But we would always tune into Basher on one of the radios in the tanks. And you would just kind of hear the JTACs or the forward observers calling in targets to Basher. You hear or see some fire or tracer rounds coming from the sky. And then everything was just kind of calm the rest of the night. No one was really moving around after that. And that happened literally every night. It was just kind of weird that nothing really kind of happened during the night. So they were my favorite combined arms asset because they let us sleep a little bit and catch our breath and rest and refit.
Yes, sir. And speaking of rest and refit, let's talk a little bit about retrograde. So how did you all retrograde back and actually get back to the States?
Retrograde back happened, I want to say April timeframe. So retrograde in, we were in 7 tons and Humvees, and we drove throughout the middle of the night. We had no idea what was going on. At one point, we were dismounted, like assaulting through an objective that there was no one there, and we didn't really know what was going on. Retrograde back was much better. We got on a bunch of CH-47s and we flew from Fallujah to LtCol. We were in LtCol for about a week. And then it was a flight from there to Kuwait. We were in Kuwait for a couple of days, and then a flight from Kuwait back to Lejeune.
And how long was it before you did your second deployment as part of the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit?
Yeah, so I think I knew coming out of Fallujah that I was designated already for the 24th MU with BLT-18. So we got back, we did block leave, and then the platoon started to kind of get reformed. I was lucky enough where I was able to keep a lot of the same Marines from 2nd Platoon went with me on float, or I got a dump of Marines from other company or other platoons from Charlie Company. So it was really like a Charlie Company reunion going back out on the 24th MU. And I think we were composited, this was right around Hurricane Katrina timeframe. So BLT-18, I think, was down at Hurricane Katrina, but we composited, I want to say October or November of 2005. Did all the workups, and then we were out the door again. Summer of 06, June of 06, we were out the door on the USS Whidbey Island.
And part of your workups, I read here that you spent a month boondoggling in the United Kingdom, testing some equipment with some of your Marines. So that sounds like an absolute boondoggle, sir.
Yeah, boondoggle is probably a fair statement there. I wouldn't classify that as a deployment, but that was probably one of the best exercises we ever had. So, Captain Bodis, somehow I pulled the wool over his eyes, and he designated me to go on this testing of friend or foe equipment in the UK for a month. So it was me and 29 other Marines that kind of plussed us up with some maintenance capabilities. And we were in Salisbury Plains, England, which I think is on the southwestern side of the country. It's right near Stonehenge. Stonehenge was a 10-minute bus ride away. In fact, we did a re-enlistment while we were there at Stonehenge, so that was pretty cool.
That's cool.
But think of Camp Wilson, except in the Salisbury Plains of England. That's kind of where we were. And yes, they certainly had a club that was there. Some nights the drinking got a little bit out of hand because we had to be on the tanks the next day. But we all survived. And I remember getting a call from Captain Bodish, or I called back there. This was pre-cell phone and international. They sent me over with one of the satellite phones. Mm-hmm. So I remember calling him maybe like 2 weeks after we got there, and he just chewed my ass. He's like, "Where have you been? We've been trying to contact you. You're supposed to check in with us." And I was like, "Oh, sorry. You gave me a mission. I came over here and we've been doing the mission." So from that point on, that was a good lesson to, make sure you're keeping higher headquarters informed of what's going on. I want to say there was 30 countries there. It was a NATO-led evolution. And it was essentially a friend or foe program that was tied into the laser rangefinder of the tank. And so when you lased a target, it would come back and tell you friend or foe. The whole intent was to reduce the amount of blue on blue casualties that we could have if we were to deploy and fight with NATO. But it was a great exercise. I remember we had 4 U.S. Marine Corps M1A1 tanks online with 4 Challengers from the UK. And that platoon commander was kind of the lead, and we were doing action drills. And there was a Scottish brigade. We could not understand a word they were saying on the radio. So I just remember me and Chase Good being up in loader's hatch, trying to communicate with my driver, Wild Bill Hansen. I think they said left, but we got to wait until they actually start to turn so we don't ram into each other. And then we had to communicate that down to the rest of the platoon. So that was a good time out there in the UK. Most of those Marines were already assigned to the MEU platoon. So it was kind of a good start into prior to being chopped over to the MEU. As kind of a team building exercise, get everybody together as we got ready for the MEU deployments.
Going on the MEU deployment, sir, what did you all actually get off and train, and what did that kind of look like?
We did. We actually got really lucky with this MEU platoon. Most of the MEUs up to this point were just get on the ship, go to Kuwait, get off in Kuwait, drive to Iraq, and you do 6 more months in Iraq. We actually we made it to Kuwait. We never made it to Iraq. So we did some training exercises in Jordan. It was a big training exercise that got cut short with the Lebanon non-evacuation of non-combatant evacuation operation in Lebanon, the NEO, that took place back in 2006. So we went from Jordan, we got back on the ships, went back through the Suez. We spent some time off the coast of Lebanon, making trips back and forth from there to Cyprus. And then we were on our way to Djibouti, and our ship actually broke. So we didn't get a chance to go to Djibouti. We actually spent about a week, maybe over a week in Cyprus while the ship got repaired, while everybody else was in Djibouti. So the other 2 ships never let us live that down. And then we actually went to Pakistan for about 3 weeks, and we did an exercise with Pakistan. The tanks did not get off the ship, so we were dismounted at this point. So we did a lot of dismounted patrolling and things like that. We got ready, similar to getting ready to go to Fallujah. We didn't really know what was going to be going on in Iraq, if we were told to get off the ship, if the tanks were going to go. So we focused that Pakistan mission on basic patrolling, kind of broke into a squad level like operation, did some perimeter security, things like that. I was trying to think of, what could we possibly be tasked with? So that's kind of what we worked on in Pakistan. And then we spent a good majority of time in Kuwait. I would say at least a month in Kuwait. Some of the Marine Expeditionary Unit was pushed into Iraq, but the preponderance of it stayed in Kuwait. And if you've ever been to Kuwait, they've got some great ranges out there, just totally flat, open desert. So we were able to do a gunnery out in Kuwait. And then somehow we ended up with the Army, and they fixed all of our tanks and gave us new turrets and rebuilt everything.
Wow.
I don't know who paid for that. I was just a dumb lieutenant at the time, but I know we were able to come back with some fresh tanks to second tanks after that.
Outstanding.
Hopefully the statute of limitations are ran out on that if somebody's still looking for the bill.
And then when you did come back, that completed your first tour with second tanks, and then you assumed duties as a maneuver and fire support team Coyote, otherwise known as a FIS Coyote, for Tactical Training Exercise Control Group in 29 Palms. So were you 4-5 Alpha, sir?
I was 4-5 Bravo.
Okay.
I think Captain Tony Davis was 4-5 Alpha at the time while I was out there. This was another great tour. I reluctantly did not want to go to 29 Palms. As a tanker, active duty, you really only get 2 choices, Lejeune or 29 Palms. And I really didn't want to do my B billet in 29 Palms. I just met, a new girl who's now my wife at the time. So now I'm trying to explain to her, like, yeah, I wanted to go to Quantico and be a TBS instructor, but now they're sending me to 29 Palms. And she's like, where's 29 Palms? I'm like, California. She still had, a year-ish left of school at UNCW, University of North Carolina, Wilmington. But it all worked out in the end. We ended up getting married a couple years later. But I did not want to go to TTCG.
Mm.
It turns out that was probably one of the best moves that I made, going out and executing. We ended up executing 41 enhanced Mojave Vipers, or combined arms exercises, or integrated training exercises, or MAGTF warfighting exercises, whatever we're calling them today. But that was really a great experience to truly see the power that the Marine Air Ground Task Force, or MAGTF, can bring to bear. And I was able to kind of see it from the ground up. I was covering down on fire teams and squads on range 410 Alpha and 400. And then I got an opportunity to become a fire support team instructor and kind of see how all the combined arms got to be packaged together. It was just a great experience to be able to do that. And that was right at the height of the surge back into Iraq, which is why we did so many enhanced Mojave Vipers. And they were stacked back to back. They're a little bit different now, but you had a combined arms portion, and then you had a non-live fire portion that took you through your 30 days. I was on the combined arms side, the live fire side, which lasted 2 weeks. So at the end of that 2 weeks, that battalion went to do non-live fire. But the day you debriefed that battalion, the new battalion was there ready to do their 2 weeks. And it was just back to back. I think I was in the field 71 straight days at one point, which was, it's all good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Learned a great deal from that.
I concur. That was one of my greatest experiences out there. I'm going to ask you a loaded question now. Having seen the MAGTF at its glory in both the corridors, and seeing what that tank brings to the fight, what do you think the future of the MAGTF is going to look like with the loss of such a dominant direct fire weapon system, namely being the M1A1?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't know if I can give you a true answer on that. And to be honest, I don't know if the service knows what the future of the MAGTF looks like. I will say this, reading all the documents that are coming out from Headquarters Marine Corps, I think the battlefield is going to be extremely more distributed than what we're used to seeing. And when I say distributed, I know some people have been deployed to Afghanistan, and battle space owners had 500 square miles of battle space in Afghanistan, and we consider that distributed. I think it's going beyond 500 square miles. We could be spread across island chains. You could be spread across different countries in the future, and I kind of think that's how the future of the MAGTF is going to be put together. As we increase the lethality and distance of the weapon systems, inevitably the battle space is going to have to be spread out. Yeah, so I truly think that the battlefield is going to be totally spread out. The more dispersion we have, the more resources the enemy has to allocate to find, fix, and locate us. And I think that's really the vision of the Commandant is, how can we increase our lethality, increase the ranges of our weapon systems, spread out across the battlefield, and put the enemy, in the horns of dilemma. The typical MAGTF answer is going to be on a much greater scale than what we've been used to operating over the past 20 or so years.
That's an excellent answer, sir. And I appreciate you breaking that down. And it was very well spoken, and you brought some great points. Obviously you harked on your experience as a WTI going through there as a ground combat arms officer, not an experience that most tankers get to do. And then also all the schooling you've had up to this point. So, awesome.
The only good thing I remember from WTI is that I got to ride in a Harrier and a Cobra for an hour. Other than that, I really didn't enjoy WTI that much.
And that closes out that tour, where you now come back to Second Tanks for now the second time, from June of 2011 to July 2014. And it was here you acted as the company commander for Delta Company, and the battalion executive officer, and pulled another deployment here, this time to the United Arab Emirates as an advisor to the UAE Presidential Guard Recon Battalion as the Marine Corps Training Mission. Long acronym, basically it's MCTIM UAE. And here, interesting billet, I'm sure. And obviously being a field grade officer, second tanks at this time, everyone's getting pulled for IAs. So this was yours. So what are your experiences and what are your memories kind of back from this tour?
Yeah, so I was not a major at this point. I was still a captain.
Okay.
But again, I have to credit Colonel Bodish for kind of looking out for me, similar to how he sent me on that boondoggle of the UK. I think he was a battalion XO at this point. And he said, hey, you can either take an IA to Afghanistan for a year or he could send you to UAE for 3 to 6 months. And I said, I didn't even know where United Arab Emirates was at the time, but it sounded better than Afghanistan. So took that. I was the advisor to the Presidential Guard Recon Battalion. And you're thinking to yourself, what is a tanker doing advising a recon battalion? But these guys were in the very basic stages of military skill set. It was a great experience to go over there and kind of interact with a foreign military to see, they look at the world through a different lens than we look through the world. And it was good to get that perspective, especially, towards the tail end of that deployment. I knew I was coming back. I got lucky enough where they were going to give me Delta Company back, and I was going to be deploying Delta Company to Afghanistan. So my last couple of months there, I really kind of asked them a bunch of questions about perspective, what they thought about certain things, and that kind of helped prepare getting ready to go to Afghanistan, coming straight out of UAE. I had the opportunity later on when I was stationed in Bahrain to go back to UAE, and I have nothing but good things to say about the country of United Arab Emirates. I think they're one of our strongest partners in the Middle East region, and they're a capable military going forward to be on our side.
It's interesting you had that experience prior to going to Afghanistan. I'm sure that gave you a perspective that proved, like you said, very informational and helpful during this, what came to be the last deployment of tanks into Afghanistan as part of Company D, 2nd Tank Battalion. And this was in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And I think we've also had some folks from Company D come on here talk about OEF. But from your perspective, sir, in your seat, what are your memories and who were kind of the influential people that made this such a successful tour?
Yeah, so we talked earlier about Charlie Company being stacked. Delta Company was certainly stacked as well. In fact, Colonel Lauder, who was the battalion commander at the time, he used to refer to us as the Dream Team, and he wanted to stack us appropriately. So I had awesome platoon commanders. And an XO, my XO was Lieutenant Joe Fryer, the tallest tanker I've ever met. He was 6'8" and just a giant beast. He's now a cop here in San Diego. My lieutenants were Lieutenant Ryan Sawyer, who's now the OPSO at 1st Tank Battalion. Lieutenant Ryan Himmenhafer, who's now a major. In fact, I just recruited him. He's my I&I out at Site Support Camp Lejeune. Just finished the company command tour at 2nd Tanks. And Lieutenant Carlos Salvarino was my 3rd platoon commander. Just a great group of guys. Carlo's out now, but Carlo, he was smarter than everybody combined. He was a John Hopkins, essentially brain surgeon that decided he wanted to do a quick stint in the Marine Corps. He's since gotten out and gotten an MBA from Harvard and is doing, I'm sure, great things in the New York City area. Platoon sergeants for that deployment were Staff Sergeant Vega Velasquez, Staff Sergeant John Ward, and Gunny Tapio, who's now Master Guns Tapio. And I think Vega is a Master Sergeant now. And then my tank leader was Top Phillips, who I think you had on the show. And then my first sergeant was First Sergeant Monroe, who had done probably 2 previous deployments with infantry units as a first sergeant to Afghanistan. So there was just an incredible amount of experience from top to bottom in that company. My maintenance chief was Gunny Dirk, who's now a master, or was a master sergeant. I think he retired as a master sergeant recently. Just a phenomenal company. But this was a totally different deployment than what I had experienced as a lieutenant with Charlie Company in Fallujah 7 or 8 years earlier. And I say that in Fallujah, like I said, everything was declared hostile in Fallujah. If you needed to shoot a building and you didn't know what was in the building, you could shoot the building to make sure that it was ready for infantrymen to go in there and clear it afterwards. That was certainly not the case in Afghanistan. And it's just a matter of timing. We had already declared that combat operations had been turned over to the Afghan army. Anything that you did, for the most part, you have to partner with the Afghan army. There was to a point where some of the tasks were, if you take contact and you can withdraw, that's what we want you to do. That's not what you want to hear as a tanker, because certainly you can withdraw in a tank if you're taking small arms fire. So it was just a really different. I think we shot 3,000 main gun rounds in Fallujah as a company, and hundreds of thousands of small arms. I believe we were at 2 main gun rounds in Afghanistan. But we had some great toys in Afghanistan. We had the new multi-purpose high explosive round with the time fuse on it. We had the canister round, which all were really developed as a result of what we were doing in Fallujah. And those would have been great rounds to use in Fallujah. But it was another great deployment. We were spread out all over the place. It was a platoon centric fight at that point, really kind of deploying as sections to ensure that routes were clear, providing overwatch, not the exciting stuff of tank infantry integration, like clearing through the streets of Sangin. Just a different deployment. It was tough. I wouldn't say it was tough. We just needed to we could not become complacent there. The enemy was much more experienced in Afghanistan than what we experienced in Iraq. And they watched this all the time. They knew what was going on. The key to it was, changing up our patterns as best we could, and then getting off the roads out there, which at times were difficult because we had rollers on the front of the tank that kind of stuck up like this in front of the front slope. I mean, you couldn't even traverse with the gun tube down at times. So we were in elevation uncoupled a lot, where you could see, and then we'd have to, if we found something, we have to position the tank in a spot where we could traverse the turret over the side and look at that. I was not a fan of those mine rollers, but it was towards the latter part of the deployment, it was actually mandated that we had to have those on the tanks, and it was no good.
And coming back, sir, you dual-hatted as the H&S Company Commander, Battalion Executive Officer. This was from January to June 2014. And H&S Company on the West Coast, we certainly call it Hydra, and I'm sure it has a very similar moniker on the East Coast. And really, what that is that's just a cats and dogs, candlesticks and bakers of all the battalion. Certainly qualified Marines, certainly very, very good at what they do, but there's so many different MOSs that kind of build up an H&S company. And I can imagine, as the company commander and a battalion executive officer, dual hatting that, you were an extremely busy man and dealing with a lot of different things that certainly rounded out your skill set and capabilities.
No, that's absolutely correct. Great experience with H&S. No one wants to leave the line companies, but when you get over to H&S Company, you really see the true heart and soul of what makes the battalion tick. Without those maintainers, the tanks don't move. Without the Humvees and the LVSRs, the fuel trucks, the 7 tons to deliver ammunition, the tank company doesn't function. So it was a great experience to kind of get to work with them. Unfortunately, since I was dual hatted, I did not get an opportunity to go to our deployed for training exercise. I think it was up in Fort Bragg. So my XO got to go in my stead to kind of do some of those patrolling firm-based like operations, while I was stuck as the RBE and the XO, taking care of all the the administrative loose ends for those couple weeks while I was back there. But certainly a great experience. I wouldn't wish anybody to be dual-hatted as the H&S company commander or the battalion executive officer, because there's just a lot going on. But it was a short stint, and it got me to check that box as far as field grade billets in the battalion, which I'm thankful for, because if I did not have that block checked, I probably would not have been able to get the alternate MOS of MAGTF Planner 0505.
And July of 2014, you got an opportunity, I guess, to use that 0505 when you assumed duties as the Chief of Readiness for Joint Task Force Civil Affairs, JTFCS, and where is located in Fort Eustis, Virginia. And it's here that the mission set says provide command and control for the Department of Defense chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear CBRN prior to the E, where we have now, response forces in U.S. NORTHCOM. So certainly outside of what appears to be your initial skill set as an armor officer, but if you're in tanks, we do windows, and I'm sure this was your opportunity to kind of do windows.
Yeah, so this was an interesting experience. This was prior to my 0505 payback tour.
Okay.
I got a call one day as the XO at Second Tanks and said, "Hey, you got orders to Marine Forces Reserve in New Orleans." From which I proceeded to call my wife, who then proceeded to cry because we had 4 kids under 4 at the time. And she did not want to raise that small of a family in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I asked the monitor, "Hey, do you have anything else?" And this billet came up. Fort Eustis, Virginia is in between Williamsburg, Virginia, and Norfolk, Virginia, to give you some perspective. So that was a little bit more amenable to both of us as far as geographic location. So that's kind of how we ended up there, counted as a joint time. And this was a totally new mission set, like you read. This command is in charge of thousands of sailors, airmen, soldiers, and Marines across the country, and their sole purpose in life is to respond to a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear incident that occurs on U.S. soil. So I think if I could take anything away from this job, it really kind of prepared me for staff work. As much as people don't want to do staff work, it really kind of helped me open the window to that. But more importantly, trying to figure out how to command and control a unit that is dispersed over literally across all 50 states at some times, I think set me up for good success of the job I'm in now as the Inspector Instructor at 4th Tanks, where I have 8 sites in 6 states in all 4 time zones. So it was a good experience to kind of lean back on my time at JTFCS in the position that I'm in now, to kind of figure out, how we're used to in the Marine Corps, all your units are on the same installation for the most part. You go to the Army, you could be a battalion commander and your units aren't even on the same installation. Whereas, now I'm working for a 2-star and all of his units are spread across the entire country, and then they're supposed to come back together at some point. So, how they train together and how you got them all, piecemealed and, working towards the same common mission for all of our exercises, I think paid off as I came into this job for Inspector Instructor.
So from October 2018 to June 2020, you served as the MAGTF Planner and Deputy Director for Plans and Naval Amphibious Task Force 51 of the 5th Marine Expeditionary Brigade, otherwise known as Task Force 515 in Bahrain. So you've gone to London, gone to England, gone to UAE, now you pull Bahrain. So clearly when, people ask, who gets these billets and how do you get these billets? You cracked that code early on and continued through your career to now you're in Bahrain. And I've heard some pretty darn good things about Bahrain. But during this time, obviously it was pretty intense because if memory serves me right, this was during the time of the killing of Soleimani and retaliatory attacks into Iraq. So although a nice terrain, certainly the environment was trying at best. So how did you deal with that, sir?
Yeah, these were interesting times to be out there in the CENTCOM AOR. But backing up, if you want to get Bahrain, you just need to put it high on your list because not too many people select Bahrain high on your list. In fact, I think we had Germany, Hawaii, Bahrain as our top 4 choices coming out of the Naval War College. And I don't even think the monitor looked at the first 3. He just saw Bahrain in somebody's top 5. So that's how you can get Bahrain as a duty assignment. But like you said, these were extremely interesting times for our nation. When I got there, we had just made the decision to pull all forces out of Syria. We're in the process of redeploying forces out of Syria. And Task Force 51-5 is unlike any other Marine Corps institution that we have. There's a 1-star general who essentially works for both Naval Central Command and Marine Central Command. So Task Force 51 is the Navy side. 5th Marine Expeditionary Brigade is the Marine Corps side of that. And you essentially have 2 chains of command that you're reporting to, one on the Navy side, one on the Marine side. The Navy side is co-located with you in Bahrain. The Marine side is either 7 or 8 hours, depending on daylight savings time, behind you in Tampa. And you're working Sunday through Thursday, and they're working Monday through Friday. So it creates it created some interesting dynamics when I was out there. But like you said, interesting times while we're there. All the Marine Expeditionary units that deploy through CENTCOM are operationally controlled by Task Force 51-5. So we were doing everything from planning exercises in lots of countries to planning real world operations in Iraq, Syria, and other places, to responding to aggression in the area from all sorts of competitors, to integrating with special operations units, to just all sorts of things. This was another great opportunity to kind of see things come full circle. 16 years earlier, I'm the lieutenant that's operating in Jordan as part of a MU exercise. Now I'm the planner that's responsible for planning that exercise. And now I've got a bit better understanding of why we're doing those exercises with those countries. And had I wish, I would be able to go back to First Lieutenant Joe Buffamante and say, hey, this is why we're doing these things with Jordan. I think I would have had better perspective when I was on the Marine Expeditionary Unit back in 2006. But you're correct. The attack on the Iraq embassy happened while we were there in Baghdad. The killing of Soleimani happened while I was out there. So it was just interesting times, very busy, very high operational tempo. I think the only thing that I was able to keep my sanity was that my family got to go with me for those 2 years. And we were able to, General Challenger, who was the CG there at the time, was extremely flexible with the folks that were there as far as getting them time away to rest and refit. So we were able to, break away as much as we could prior to, and COVID also happened while we were out there. So trying to figure out how to keep ships COVID free and things like that towards the tail end of that was also interesting. But we were able to, you're centrally located in Bahrain for the entire world. So we were able to get to almost 20 countries. We made some great friends while we were out there. It's a small, tight-knit community that just a great experience that I'll never forget, never have any regrets for going to Bahrain. And I would encourage, if there's anybody out there that gets an opportunity to go, it's certainly worth going to experience. And the Bahraini people are absolutely fantastic.
Yes, sir. And you mentioned the strange period of time with COVID and everything. Not to mention that also during this time is when you assumed your duties at 4th Tanks as the Inspector Instructor. And by this point, I think the divestment message had already come out. And now you are assigned, and for those that don't know, the Inspector Instructor is the active duty component that is basically keeps the lights on in order to enable and assist the or the reserve component battalion commander. So you are the INI, the battalion commander is just that. However, he is a reservist and he works reserve hours. Although I know a lot of them work a heck of a lot more than what is prescribed on the drill sheet. And I will say that my time as an inspector instructor at the company level was probably some of my best experiences I've ever had. And it really came down to personalities and people. I have an absolute utmost respect for the reservists. I've said multiple times, and I'll say it publicly, I don't think I could be a reservist just because of the way my brain is programmed, because those guys and gals, they work or they go to school or they deal with life Monday through Friday. And then on Friday, they flip a switch and they become a Marine. And in our business as tankers and support elements for tankers, that is a very challenging duty assignment because there's no shortcuts. They are required to do the exact same level of training as their active components. And it is your job, sir, as the INI, to facilitate the stations and the duty stations, which you already mentioned are spread out geographically across the entire United States, to do just that, to enable the reservists to do their jobs, to train, and to be ready when the nation calls on, if they go as a unit, or in some cases, if they go as an augmentation force. So, and I imagine, sir, having to deal with COVID plus the divestment message, this tour for you, I'm sure, has been extremely challenging. And
I was selected for INI duty before the divestment message came out, and before COVID. I was actually in 29 Palms from Bahrain doing the ground commander's element course. And I decided, hey, since I made the trip, 11 hours across the country or across the world, really, I might as well swing by 4th Tanks to kind of do a quick one-on-one with Lieutenant Colonel Smith, kind of see what this whole INI thing is all about. So I was here on 13 March of 2020 in San Diego, doing a quick kind of meet and greet with the staff here. And I was supposed to fly back. I think they were drilling that weekend. I was supposed to fly back that Monday, but it was looking like I wasn't going to be able to make it back to Bahrain due to COVID. So quickly got back to Bahrain through London, of all places to go through at the height of COVID. Got back to Bahrain, and then I had to go into a 14-day quarantine when I was in Bahrain. While I was in quarantine is when the divestment message was dropped. Lieutenant Colonel Smith reached out with the message, the McBull. So I had nothing but time on my hands while I was in quarantine to read through the 16-page McBull. And it, I think everybody on here has said it. There's obviously a level of disappointment when your community is divested of. But I will say this, having now sat in the seat for almost a year as the inspector instructor, the Marines have been totally flexible and adaptable to the situation, just like all Marines have been since the advent of the Marine Corps. They want to serve the nation in any way and capacity that they can, for the most part. And as a reservist, like you said, and I think Lieutenant General Bellin describes it best. He calls it an irrational call to service, where no rational human being would make the decision to work a full work week, and then after that full work week, sign up to then come and do training exercises with the Marine Corps, run PFTs, run CFTs, go to 29 Palms to do a combined arms exercise, whatever it is. And for some of these guys, when they come to drill, they're taking pay cuts in their civilian sector. And there's certainly a misnomer out there as far as, a drilling reservist is only working 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. I mean, these guys, especially if they're in leadership positions, Lieutenant Colonel Mike O'Quinn, who's my counterpart, I talk almost daily to him. There's something to be done at all times from an administrative perspective. They're preparing for the next drill period to make sure that the Marines are set up for success. So, I've heard you say it numerous times on this show, and I know that you've had some reservists on there. Nothing but the utmost respect for those guys and the service that they provide to the country. Because really, they are what enables us to be the most ready when the nation is least ready.
Sure. And sir, with the divestment pretty well complete, obviously we're going to be officially encasing the colors of 1st Tank Battalion here very shortly. You just encased your colors, and 2nd kind of let off the charge a couple weeks ago now. It doesn't get any easier, and the message that this channel almost a year ago kind of started out was, to the community saying, if you have an already made a decision, what are your options and what's kind of advice. I think that the channel has matured to the point now where these are becoming historical videos, and hopefully down the road somebody will be watching these videos, and who knows, maybe it'll be a new vehicle comes online and they're trying to see what these crazy tankers talked about, but maybe it would be something different. And as somebody that has had a very successful career doing a lot of different things, to include a boondoggle, what message do you have for that next generation?
Probably more than one boondoggle in there.
What message do you have for that future viewer that's looking back and kind of seeing what made Tank special and what made the community so special?
Yeah. So before I answer that, I'll go back to what opportunities or choices the Marines could potentially have. I will say this: the Marine Corps has done a fantastic job of trying to keep and retain as many Marines as they could in whatever capacity that the Marine could. For the reservists, we try to keep them close to their home of record, so they don't have to travel very much, and they can kind of be contained to their local community. If they go beyond that, normally, they're coming out of their own pocket to pay for those travel expenses. Every Marine that decided to move outside of those limits is going to get reimbursed for the next 3 years while force design unshakes itself, and maybe they can get back into the local community for whatever unit is coming behind us to all of our sites. If they wanted to lat move, the Marine Corps let them lat move. If they wanted to drop to the IRR or the individual ready reserve because there wasn't really a spot for them and they didn't want to travel, they were able to drop to the individual ready reserve. So I will say, I can't speak much for the active component, although we had great success transitioning our active component Marines, but we don't have nearly as many as 1st and 2nd tanks do. They have done a great job, as best as they could, considering all circumstances. Yes, everybody wants to continue to be a tanker, but if tanks is not on the table, the Marine Corps has done just about as good a job as any, is getting them into that second choice to make sure that they can continue to progress in their careers. So I would say that the best circumstances possible were presented to the Marines. And again, obviously, people want to continue to be tank mechanics and tankers, but they can't do that in the Marine Corps anymore. If they wanted to do that in the Army or the Army National Guard, that opportunity was certainly presented to itself, and multiple people took advantage of it. So as far as what makes tanks special, that's a pretty loaded question, and I could probably spend hours, rambling on and on about it. But I think one of the things that truly makes Marine tankers stand out is that from a very early age, PFC, 2nd lieutenant, we are exposed to the Marine Air Ground Task Force like no other MOS. I've watched almost all of your episodes, and multiple people have talked about, we don't work in grid squares, we work in map sheets. Mm-hmm. And you're exposed to that very early on. You are coordinating multiple boundaries with multiple units because you're moving so fast. from a maneuver side of the house. You have the radio and the capabilities inherent to a tank to communicate to all your supporting arms, whether it be artillery or air or whatever it may be. So you're exposed to that early on. So there's the air and fires side of the MAGTF. And if you don't understand logistics, you're going to understand it really quick when the tank runs out of fuel or runs out of ammunition, and you're stuck watching everybody else drive past you towards the fight while you have to get rearmed and refueled and things like that because you weren't thinking about all that stuff, and that's kind of the logistics element of it. And then from a command and control perspective, as a tanker, I worked with, just in Fallujah alone, I think we worked with 4 infantry battalions. So that's 4 battalion commanders, 16 if you count weapons company commanders, and then whatever the math is, I won't do it in public, for platoon commanders, and then squad leaders and fire team leaders beyond that. In Afghanistan, I worked for RC Southwest and 2 battalions. So from a command element perspective of the MAGTF, you are exposed at an early age doing coordination with much higher level entities than what our lieutenant counterparts and other MOSs may be exposed to. And the same goes for the enlisted side of the house. Whether you're a PFC or a lieutenant colonel, the aperture is just opened up much wider in our community from a ground, logistics, air, and command element aspect of it. And I think that's what kind of sets tankers apart as far as being able to integrate, being flexible. And the other thing is, it's all about supporting the guy on the ground. I used to, when we deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, the saying that I always said was, we are in a 70-ton SAPU plate. The grunts have a 30-pound SAPU plate. Mm-hmm. Put the tank in a position where the 70-ton SAPU plate absorbs the first round, and then we can engage after that. And then after we are done engaging, then we'll let the infantryman with the 30-pound SAPU plate go in and clean up whatever mess we made or whatever mess they need to continue to make. So I think that's really what sets tankers apart. We're day on, stay on, all weather, direct fire, precision platform that, it won't be replaced anytime in the near future. And I think the message is for at least the next 10 years that we may not need that type of capability in the Marine Corps anymore, because the lethality of enemy weapon systems has grown so much more, and the lethality and distance of our weapon systems, there may not be a need for that type of platform on the ground anymore. And whether you agree with that or not, it's pretty irrelevant, the decisions made. And we will just march forward. I will say that the Marine Corps has gained thousands of Marines into other MOSs that will take all of those experiences and all of those attributes that I just discussed into their MOS, into their other MOSs. And hopefully that will start to breed the tanker culture across the Marine Corps into all of the MOSs. And it'll just make us that much more of a lethal force going forward into the future of force design and the future of the Marine Corps.
Thank you for that answer, sir. I mean, that's an very excellent perspective. Certainly a fantastic answer, sir. And the future is bright. And the future is bright for the Marines, and the future is bright for the Marine Corps. So thank you for that. I'm going to take a moment and thank the viewers. It's through your views and your support of the channel that we continue our momentum. And this message is out there, and hopefully will be out there for some time to come. And I will certainly thank you, sir. I know as the INI, you're extremely busy, and there's still a lot going on, even though, like I said, the divestment's over. I'm sure you're still working very hard, making sure that all the Marines are taken care of. And for that, sir, thank you. And I appreciate you making the time to come on today.
Hey, thanks, Pickle, for all you do. I really enjoy watching these. I think I had a good streak going where I watched the first 30 almost religiously. My kids would always come over and ask me who that guy in the tank is. So I need to catch up on the last 16 or so. But I truly enjoy everything that you've done for this. This is a great attribute to the tank community. Appreciate all the time and sacrifices that you've put into making these channels. You know, I just gave an hour and a half of my time. You've put, 46 episodes times probably 5 or 6 hours an episode when you get it all done editing and everything like that. So thanks for everything you're doing for the community. It was great to see you last week. Hopefully we cross paths again in the future.
I appreciate that very much, sir. Like I said, I may not be the right guy doing it, but I'm the guy doing it right now. So I appreciate the kind words. I certainly do appreciate the support as well, personally and also professionally. And you've certainly helped out with other interviews. So feel free to pass my name and number along, and anybody wants to come on, and we can certainly do that. But Semper Fi, sir.
Sounds good. Thanks, JR. Have a good night.